Welcome to The Debate.
Hello.
So imagine a blind person literally seeing the world, but they're seeing it through the sensation of like champagne bubbles popping on their tongue.
Wow.
Yeah, or picture a brilliant software engineer, totally stuck on some complex algorithm, and they finally solve it just by explaining the code out loud to a little yellow rubber duck sitting on their desk.
Right. The classic rubber duck debugging.
Exactly. Now, what if I told you that these bizarre, very human quirks share the exact same underlying architecture as the microchips powering the world's most advanced artificial intelligence?
That is a bold claim.
It is, but to get there, we have to go back to 9th century Baghdad. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi wrote a foundational treatise using a term that originally belonged to medical bone setters. The word was algebra.
Which meant the reunion of broken parts, right?
Yes, exactly. And today, we know it as algebra, but we are exploring something far beyond high school math today. We're looking at this breathtaking conceptual framework that takes this ancient linguistic root and uses it to synthesize modern AI architecture, recent MIT neuroscience discoveries, and even physical acoustic theory.
It is a massive synthesis.
It really is. So the central question before us today is this. When we map the optimization engines of machine learning, specifically compilers like AppliedXLA, directly onto biological brainwaves and the physical acoustics of sound, does this reveal a unified, literal, structural truth about the nature of cognition itself?
Or, and this is where I land, is this synthesis a profoundly elegant but maybe scientifically imprecise metaphor? One that conflates fundamentally distinct physical realities.
Right, because my argument is that this framework is an absolute revelation. It exposes a fundamental shared architecture of intelligence across both silicon and biology. I mean, at their core, both systems are fighting the exact same battle. They're desperately trying to unify discrete, chaotic data into a resonant, cohesive state. The drive to reunite broken parts isn't just poetry. It is the literal mechanical blueprint of comprehension.
I come at it from a different way. There is an undeniable aesthetic and, well, conceptual beauty in framing the rigid digital compilation of code as a form of applied algebra. I mean, the idea of bringing together broken computational parts into a unified whole, it's a stunning piece of applied philosophy.
It is beautiful.
It is, but as investigators of the material, we have to maintain definitional precision. Digital optimization on a flat silicon grid is fundamentally, physically different from biological consciousness and the three-dimensional reality of analog brainwaves.
I hear you.
Over-applying this metaphor, no matter how beautiful it feels intuitively, it really risks misunderstanding the literal physics of both the machine and the mind. Substituting digital efficiency for analog consciousness, I think it obscures the true mystery of biological awareness.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what's actually happening at the foundation of these systems. Let's look at a tensor processing unit, a TPU.
Okay.
It's essentially an engine of matrix multiplication. Think of it like a massive, sprawling factory floor of digital switches, crunching linear algebra.
Very fast, but very rigid.
Incredibly rigid. Every worker on that factory floor is isolated, doing one discrete math problem. Now, in the biological brain, the equivalent is our raw circuitry and synapses, the physical infrastructure holding our memories and goals.
The wetware.
Right, the wetware. But raw synaptic rewiring is just far too slow for nimble, improvised thought.
Yeah, it takes time to build those physical connections.
Exactly. Just like calculating discrete digital operations step by step is immensely inefficient for an AI. So both systems desperately require a metacognitive control system to organize the hardware. If you leave that factory floor alone, it's just chaos.
And that is where AppliedXLA comes in.
Yes, it looks at a fragmented, broken computation graph, and it fuses those distinct operations into a seamless execution. And this is the crazy part. Recent MIT research reveals that the human brain does this exact same thing, using analog computation.
You're talking about the traveling waves.
Yes, specifically rhythmic traveling waves of neural activity. AppliedXLA is acting functionally identical to those spatial temporal brainwaves. Both exist solely to reunite broken mathematical parts into a globally integrated state.
Okay, the functional comparison is fascinating, I'll give you that.
Thank you.
But we really need to unpack the actual mechanics here, the how and the why, because this is where the framework starts to blur the lines of physical reality.
How so?
Well, you're talking about AppliedXLA as if it is a literal wave. XLA operates on a rigid digital grid. It compiles code by flipping discrete switches with predefined logic gates. If XLA creates a wave, it is a wave in time.
Okay.
It's a scheduling trick, right? It forces a fragmented list of tasks to execute seamlessly on a clock. But the biological reality you are comparing it to relies on a mechanism called ephaptic coupling.
Right, the electric fields.
Exactly. So if you're listening to us right now, as your brain processes the sound of my voice, your biological neurons are firing and generating literal physical electric fields. And those fields rapidly grow to physically influence the surrounding neurons through three-dimensional analog wave interference.
It's a physical force.
Yes, it is not a software scheduling trick. It is a physical force altering organic matter. Biological neurons exhibit what we call mixed selectivity. Because of those overlapping electric fields, a single biological neuron can participate in multiple different thought networks simultaneously.
Right.
XLA cannot do that. It optimizes discrete digital switches so they fire in a more efficient sequence, but it doesn't create a physical resonant field.
But let's drill down into that microscopic layer for a second. Because the MIT findings give us a perfect model for why that temporal wave in the silicon is functionally identical to the spatial wave in the wetware.
Okay, lay it out.
So the researchers found that slow alpha and beta waves in the brain act as a top-down control system. These slow waves represent our stored memories, our rules, our intentions.
They hold the context.
Right, and they act like a mobile stencil traveling across the physical cortex. They literally dictate where and when the much faster chaotic gamma waves are allowed to process incoming sensory data.
So they're gating the information.
Exactly. They organize which neural ensembles get to participate in a thought at any given millisecond. Now look at AppliedXLA. It does the exact same thing across a TPU grid.
By scheduling the tasks.
Right. It operates as a digital mobile stencil. It governs where and when data is processed, merging discrete tasks into flowing parallel computations. So sure, the medium might be silicon instead of gray matter, and the wave might be in time rather than 3D space. But the structural mechanism, a top-down stencil organizing bottom-up chaotic data, it's doing the exact same mathematical work.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. And let me tell you why by looking at the extremes of how these systems fail.
Okay, fair enough.
Think about what happens when this biological system scales up to the level of human consciousness. The MIT researchers demonstrated that general anesthesia works precisely by disrupting these large-scale wave organizations.
It scrambles the waves.
Yes. The anesthesiologist isn't turning off the brain's hardware. The neurons are still there. They are collapsing the wave dynamics. And when those wave dynamics collapse, consciousness, your unified awareness of self and thought, vanishes entirely into nothingness.
Right, you're just gone.
But a TPU does not lose consciousness if you turn off XLA. If you disable the compiler, the TPU just reverts to running unoptimized sequential code.
It slows down.
Exactly, it just runs slower. It still completes the math. In the brain, the biological wave is the consciousness itself. In the machine, the digital graph is just a speed optimization. I think you are conflating a speed upgrade with the emergence of the soul.
I'm not conflating speed with the soul. I'm saying that in the universe of computation, mathematically optimized speed is what allows comprehension to emerge.
Okay, but...
No, really, hear me out. If you want proof that optimizing separate, discrete parts creates a unified whole, we don't even need to look at biology or silicon. We can literally listen to it.
You're talking about acoustics now.
Yeah. Have you ever wondered why a high-end Bose speaker system sounds like you are standing in a concert hall rather than just listening to a bunch of separate plastic cones rattling in a box?
Because of the phasing.
Exactly. Dr. Amar Bose built his entire acoustic philosophy on this. An individual TPU core or an individual biological neuron acts as what audio engineers call a multi-mono signal.
Right. It's just one channel of noise.
It is an independent, discrete source of information. It's totally chaotic on its own. Bose understood that if you manage the interference and phasing of discrete signals, like taking a powerful, isolated subwoofer and perfectly timing it with an array of high-frequency top speakers, you don't just get louder sound.
You get a soundstage.
You project a unified, immersive analog field, and the brain uses these exact same principles. The discrete multi-mono spikes of individual neurons are rapidly absorbed via that F-factic coupling you described earlier into a unified electric field.
Okay.
Through what we might call theory of mind comprehension, nimbleness and cognition emerge, precisely when those dynamic waves bring the hardware into a resonant state. XLM mimics this acoustic harmony. It absorbs the discrete multi-mono computations and forces them into a unified cognitive wave.
But that is exactly where the acoustic analogy falls apart for me.
Why? It's the same math.
Because Amar Bose's acoustic principles rely on literal physical wave interference in the air. Acoustic phasing works because sound waves physically crash into one another in the room you are sitting in, adding and subtracting pressure in physical space.
Right. F-factic coupling works because electric fields physically overlap and alter the voltage of adjacent cellular membranes in your skull.
Yes, they're both physical. But a TPU is fundamentally, intentionally devoid of physical wave interference. In fact, the electricity running through the silicon is highly regulated by engineers to prevent exactly that kind of physical interference.
You mean crosstalk?
Yes. We call it crosstalk, and in hardware engineering, it is a fatal error that destroys the chip. XLA is simulating integration through mathematical sequencing on a flat grid. It is absolutely not achieving it through physical resonance.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it quite differently.
Go ahead.
Whether the wave is an acoustic pressure wave in a room, an electric field in the cortex, or a digital graphical execution map on a TPU, the underlying mathematical imperative is identical. The medium doesn't matter, the math does.
That's a big leap.
But it's backed up by the chinchilla laws. In 2022, Tom Hennigan and his team at DeepMind formulated these laws to understand AI efficiency.
Right, balancing compute and data.
Exactly. I'll explain it like baking in a kitchen. Imagine you have a massive, state-of-the-art kitchen. That's your compute power. But you only have one egg and a cup of flour. That's your training data.
You can't bake a cake with that.
You can't. Conversely, if you have 10 tons of ingredients but only one tiny easy-bake oven, the ingredients rot before you can use them.
Right, it's a bottleneck.
Chinchilla proved that to achieve optimal artificial cognition, you must have an exact mathematical proportional balance between compute parameters and training data. It is a universal law of efficiency.
Okay, but how does that connect back to the brain?
Evolutionary pressure forces all these systems, biological or artificial, to maximize computation per unit energy by avoiding unbalanced sequential processing. The universe strictly rewards systems that can efficiently convert chaotic multi-mono fragments into unified waves. The chinchilla laws provide the mathematical mandate for efficiency, and XLA executes it. The brain reached this exact same mathematical conclusion millions of years ago.
The mathematical mandate for efficiency is universal. Yes, I will grant you that. Thermodynamics applies to everything.
Right.
But how systems achieve that efficiency is profoundly different. And that difference becomes glaringly obvious when we step out of the microscopic layer and talk about actual human behavior.
Okay, let's do it.
You want to apply this framework externally to how people communicate. You brought up the concept of rubber duck debugging earlier and tied it to Uri Hassan's work at Princeton on neurocoupling.
Yes, exactly. Because this is where the framework moves from internal architecture to external expression, using what's called the verbal cognitive scaffold, or VCS model.
Right.
Anyone who writes code knows about rubber duck debugging. When a programmer is stuck on a broken algorithm, they will literally place a toy rubber duck on their desk and explain their broken code to it, line by line.
It sounds crazy if you've never done it.
Totally. But why does it work? Because when you are stuck, your thoughts are in a fragmented, disjointed, multi-mono state. Different circuits in your brain are holding different variables, totally out of sync.
You can't see the forest for the trees.
Right. By utilizing inner speech, or speaking out loud to the duck, You are literally applying XLA to your own brain. You are forcing the fragmented, chaotic, parallel logic in your head into a sequential auditory format.
Because you have to vocalize it one word at a time.
Exactly. Because you are acting as both the transmitter and the receiver, your auditory cortex processes your own speech, creating a cohesive neural wave. You sync your own brain up with itself, forcing a reunion of broken parts.
I have to pause here because psychologically, that is a staggering insight. I mean, the idea that speaking aloud is a biological mechanism to force your own brain out of a chaotic multi-mono state into a sequenced wave is beautiful.
It makes so much sense, right?
It explains so much about human nature and why we talk to ourselves. But, and this is a massive but, it fundamentally mischaracterizes the biology of Uri Hassan's neural coupling.
How so?
Strict aphaptic coupling, the actual overlapping of electric fields we discussed earlier, is impossible over distance.
Well, sure, not directly.
Right. The human skull is a highly effective biological insulator. The electric fields generated by your brain are incredibly weak. They cannot cross physical space to directly influence another person's neurons, nor can they loop out of your mouth and back into your own ears as an electric field.
No, they loop back as sound.
Exactly. Hassan's fMRI work shows that brains synchronize via sound waves. You are transmitting a common code that presents meaning. The sound wave is a mechanical medium vibrating the air. We must strictly distinguish between the literal internal microscopic electric fields of the brain and the external, mechanical medium of sound waves. Calling them both AppliedXLA conflates a biological necessity with a communicative action.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because I think you are creating an artificial boundary between the internal and external processor.
An artificial boundary? The skull is pretty physical.
Yes, but whether the wave is an electric field inside the skull or an acoustic wave in the air, the functional result is exactly the same. The system is being forced out of chaos into an integrated state.
Okay, but
Wait, think about Hassan scans. They show that when someone tells a story and someone actively listens, their brainwaves in the auditory and language cortices begin to align in the exact same spatiotemporal patterns.
neural entrainment.
Yes, the sound waves act as the bridge, sure. But the effect is the fusing of two discrete minds into a shared cognitive wave. When you speak to the rubber duck, you are forcing two separate analog processors, your frontal lobe wrestling with the math and your auditory cortex processing the sound of your voice to vibrate at the exact same frequency.
I see what you're saying.
You are using the physical mechanics of speech to achieve those chinchilla laws of efficiency. You are minimizing chaotic thought to push your neural network into a globally integrated state where the solution suddenly just appears.
I completely agree with the psychological outcome. Verbalizing forces sequential organization, which clarifies thought. That is indisputable.
Right.
It is a poetic synthesis. It is a beautiful metaphor, but it is not a structural reality.
We might just have to disagree on that.
But let's take this to its absolute limit, because I know you want to apply this framework to the ultimate test of the brain's architecture, neuroplasticity, and the literal repair of broken human perception.
I do, because this is where the biological algebra of Al-Jab stops being a metaphor and becomes literal physical reality. Let's look at sensory substitution.
Okay, this is fascinating stuff.
It really is. The neuroscientist David Eagleman and computer scientists like David Mullen have explored virtual vision through devices called tongue display units.
Right, for the blind.
Yes, a blind person wears a camera on their forehead. That camera translates the visual pixels of the room into tiny electrical impulses on a grid placed on their tongue.
And users initially describe it as feeling chaotic, right?
Totally chaotic, like dancing gummy bears or champagne bubbles constantly popping on their tongue. But over time, the brain is presented with an algebraic equation. You have a missing value. Vision is X. To solve for X, the brain substitutes a different variable. Tactile tongue stimulation is Y. The neural networks act as the coefficients routing the data.
Right, and initially the tongue is sending millions of discrete, raw, chaotic electrical spikes to the sensory cortex. It is the ultimate multi-mono state.
Exactly. And if the brain processed that sequentially, one spike at a time, it would just feel like a buzzing tongue forever. Comprehension would never emerge.
But the brain adapts.
Right. And the MIT analog wave theory shows us how the brain compiles this. The slow alpha and beta waves wash over the sensory cortex. They perfectly capture those discrete tactile signals and compile them instantly into parallel analog computations.
So it stops feeling like a buzzing tongue?
The brain doesn't care that the data is coming from the tongue instead of the optic nerve. It just wants the math to balance. The analog wave acts as the ultimate AppliedXLA compiler. It instantly takes the fragmented parts and converts the raw tactile data into spatial, three-dimensional virtual vision in the mind. The blind person literally begins to see the space around them.
Okay, the gummy bear visual is amazing, and the outcome of sensory substitution is one of the miracles of human biology. I will give you that.
It's unbelievable.
But you are applying the chinchilla laws, a pristine mathematical equation of artificial efficiency, to a deeply organic, messy reality.
But the math holds up.
You are suggesting that the biological brain uses the exact optimal chinchilla ratio to balance those tactile impulses with its analog waves. Chinchilla is designed to figure out how many billions of parameters a server farm needs for a specific dataset before a model stops improving.
Right.
Suggesting that living tissue perfectly executes this mathematical ratio to balance sensory substitution is a massive stretch. Neuroplasticity is not a clean, instantaneous mathematical compilation like XLA running on a server.
I mean, it takes time, sure.
It is grueling. It takes months of exhausting, frustrating adaptation for those champagne bubbles to even begin to resemble spatial awareness. It is organic, it is imperfect, it requires sleep, it requires nutrition, and it is full of biological noise. By calling it biological algebra and AppliedXLA, you are projecting the pristine perfection of digital code onto the incredibly messy, resilient reality of living tissue.
But the messiness of the timeline doesn't invalidate the structural reality of what the tissue is actually doing.
It changes the nature of the process.
But the transition from a buzzing tongue to spatial vision is the literal physical manifestation of algebra. A blind person's sensory loop is quite literally a broken part. The brain orchestrates a neural coupling event within its own cortices to fix it.
Over a very long time.
Right. But it takes the disjointed tactile signals, balances them against the compute power of its analog waves, and mathematically reunites them into a beautiful whole visual consciousness. The fact that it takes months for the biological synapses to establish the physical infrastructure doesn't change the fact that the analog wave is doing the compiling. Whether it takes a millisecond in a server farm or 6 months in a human skull, from 9th century mathematics to modern XLA compilers to Bose acoustics and virtual vision, the drive to mathematically convert chaotic, discrete fragments into unified resonant waves is the universal architectural signature of intelligence.
And I maintain that while these are undeniably brilliant explanatory tools that illuminate incredibly complex concepts, like how neural coupling actually works when we tell stories, or the profound psychology of why rubber duck debugging saves programmers from despair, the distinction between digital code execution and biological analog wave mechanics remains a profound gulf.
They operate differently, yes.
A TPU requires XLA because it is trapped in a rigid grid of binary logic. It is lifeless, so it has to simulate flow through scheduling. The human brain doesn't simulate flow. It operates in a literal, biological bath of physical, interacting electric fields. The brain's flow.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thank you. To say they are structurally identical is to ignore the fundamental physical substrate of reality. We must respect the boundaries of our definitions, even as we marvel at the breathtaking metaphorical echoes between them.
Which leaves us at a really fascinating threshold today. Whether we view this through the precise lens of distinct physical boundaries as you suggest, or as a literal unified theory of intelligence, the depth of this conceptual framework is just staggering.
It absolutely is.
Analyzing the architecture of artificial intelligence through the lens of human biology and acoustic harmony enriches our understanding of both the technology we are racing to build and the minds we are using to build it.
Absolutely. And there is so much more to explore within the MIT research on analog computation and Uri Hassan's work on neural entrainment. The deeper we look into how machines optimize a billion parameters and how human minds comprehend a single spoken sentence, the more we realize how much we still have to learn about the nature of thought itself.
The pursuit of that understanding continues. We began with the bone setters of 9th century Baghdad, seeking a way to mend what was fractured. Perhaps the ultimate application of algebra is not just found in silicon grids or neural pathways, but in our ongoing, relentless attempt to piece together the profound mystery of consciousness itself.
What do Google's machine learning scaling laws, the sensation of dancing gummy bears on a blind person's tongue, and the invisible sound waves of a human voice have in common?
Right, yeah, on the surface.
I mean, on the surface, absolutely nothing.
Exactly nothing.
But when you look closer, they are all actually structural proofs of exactly how the human brain optimizes, how it connects, and ultimately, how it heals.
It sounds like, the setup to a highly complex riddle.
Yeah.
But the through line connecting those three seemingly random things is actually rooted in some of the most rigorous biological and computational research we have today.
Right. So today we are doing a deep dive into an incredibly dense, profoundly personal framework called AppliedXLA. And the mission here, what we're trying to do, is bridge a gap that we usually treat as unbridgeable. We constantly separate cold, hard silicon computing from, messy, emotional human biology. But this framework takes what sound like highly poetic, almost metaphorical ideas about human connection and trauma, and it anchors them directly in peer-reviewed, cutting-edge neuroscience and computer science.
And that synthesis is where the real value lies. I mean, we are looking at how the architecture of a supercomputer can actually teach us about the hardware of the human nervous system.
Yeah.
It's about stripping away the moral judgments we place on our own minds and looking at our biology as an elegant, thermodynamically balanced system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how the brain handles stress or trauma, we first have to understand how it handles basic reality.
Right.
And for a long time, we fundamentally misunderstood the brain's operating system, didn't we? Like, we thought of it like a standard laptop.
It did, yeah. Throughout history, we've always compared the brain to whatever our most advanced technology was at the time.
Like the steam engine or something.
Exactly. In the Industrial Revolution, the brain was a clockwork mechanism. In the mid-20th century, it was a telephone switchboard.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And recently, the old scientific view treated the brain essentially like a rigid, step-by-step digital processor, a linear machine where sensory data comes in, it gets processed sequentially in a little black box, and then an action is spit out.
Very mechanical. A literal if this, then that sequence.
Yeah.
But if the brain isn't a digital processor, how does it actually handle the absolute chaotic noise of the world without just crashing?
That is the exact question that brings us to Earl Miller's lab at MIT.
Okay.
Between 2018 and 2023, his team published this pioneering research on cognitive control that completely upended that digital processor model.
What did they find?
Well, they didn't find sequential, step-by-step digital code. By monitoring the cortex during highly complex tasks, they discovered that the brain actually operates through analog traveling waves.
Analog waves, so like fluid, continuous sweeps of energy rather than rigid digital steps.
Think of it as a physical wave moving across a stadium.
Oh, like people doing the wave at a baseball game?
Yeah, precisely. They showed that slower, top-down brain waves, specifically alpha and beta waves, they physically travel across the surface of the cortex. And as they sweep across, they act as what the researchers literally call mobile stencils.
I love that visual. A mobile stencil. But what is it actually tracing or filtering?
It's filtering the raw noise of reality. So you have these other waves, gamma waves.
Okay.
Gamma waves are incredibly fast, and they carry the bottom-up sensory information. That is the raw, unfiltered data of everything you are seeing, hearing, and feeling at this exact millisecond.
So it's everything all at once.
Right, and if all of that hit your conscious mind at once, it would be pure, blinding chaos.
Just totally overwhelming.
Exactly. So the slower alpha and beta waves act as a physical gate. By sweeping over the gamma waves, they create an interference pattern. They act as a massive, analog parallel computing filter.
It's like a DJ-ES soundboard. Or actually, even better, a physical sieve. You have all this chaotic noise, all these high-frequency gamma notes trying to play at the exact same time, but the stencil only lets specific notes through at exactly the right time and place.
Exactly.
So the final output isn't a wall of static. It is a cohesive, beautifully optimized song.
And that biological optimization It maps perfectly onto the namesake of the framework we are discussing,
Yeah.
AppliedXLA.
Right.
XLA is a real highly specialized term in computer science.
Yeah, it stands for Accelerated Linear Algebra.
Right.
In standard computing, especially in massive machine learning environments at places like Google, you have all these scattered, multi-threaded computations happening at once. It's a logistical nightmare.
It is.
So XLA is a compiler. It takes all of those fragmented, complex execution graphs and compiles them into a single, optimized, parallelized set of hardware instructions. It makes the system run seamlessly instead of bottlenecking.
And the brain's mobile stencil is the biological equivalent of that XLA compiler. It takes the chaotic, multi-threaded sensory inputs of those fast gamma waves and uses the alpha and beta stencils to compile them into a unified, optimized thought. Without that compiler, the biological system would be instantly overwhelmed.
So what does this all mean? We know the brain has this incredible built-in compiler to optimize the reality we experience, but every system has a limit.
Right.
How much data can this biological compiler handle before it breaks down?
To figure out that limit, the AppliedXLA framework shifts from neuroscience to artificial intelligence.
Right.
We have to look at the chinchilla laws.
The chinchilla paper, if you follow AI, this is a legendary piece of literature.
Oh, it shifted the entire trajectory of machine learning. This is a 2022 paper from Google DeepMind, authored by Hoffman and colleagues, notably including Tom Hennigan.
Right.
To give some context, before chinchilla, the AI arms race had a very brute force mentality. Developers were building early large language models by just massively inflating the model's parameter.
And the parameter is essentially a simulated neural connection, right?
Basically, yes. The logic was just make the artificial brain bigger, throw more servers at it, and it will get smarter.
The bigger is always better approach. Just keep building a larger engine.
But the DeepMind team mathematically proved that this was completely inefficient. These massive models were actually heavily undertrained.
Really?
Yeah. The chinchilla paper established that to achieve optimal intelligence per unit of compute, which means getting the smartest possible AI without wasting massive amounts of thermodynamic energy, you cannot just increase the size of the brain. You have to scale the model parameters and the training tokens in a strict 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay, let me make sure I have this right. The parameters are the computational power, the engine. The tokens are the training data, the fuel.
Yes.
And this law dictates that for every single step you increase the model's processing size, you need an exact proportional increase in the data it tests fed. You can't have a massive brain with no data, and you can't flood a tiny brain with an ocean of data.
That strict 1-to-1 ratio is non-negotiable for thermodynamic efficiency. If that balance is off, the system wastes energy, it hallucinates, it lags, it is functionally de-optimized.
Now here is where the AppliedXLA framework does something really ambitious. It maps this strict 1-to-1 computational ratio directly onto biological systems.
It does.
Specifically, it applies it to what is known as a twice exceptional, or 2E, mind.
Right, which is a mind that is highly cognitively gifted, meaning it has massive compute power, but perhaps also dealing with asynchronous development, ADHD, or autism.
Yeah. And the framework argues that this 2E mind has to maintain a perfect 1-to-1 thermodynamic balance between data input, which is a raw sensory and emotional experience of the world, and its internal compute parameters.
And if that balance is thrown off under stress, the biological system suffers from what the framework calls de-optimization loops and metabolic compilation spikes.
Okay, I have to push back on this for a second.
Sure.
Because I get the metaphor, but it feels like a massive leap. You are taking a mathematical rule explicitly designed to keep Google's Silicon server farms from overheating, and you are saying it literally dictates human burnout.
I know, it sounds wild.
Like if an AI model, it gets a compilation spike, the servers run hot and the cooling fans spin up. What does a compilation spike actually look like in flesh and blood? How do human emotions equal AI training tokens?
It is a profound question, and what's fascinating here is how the biological mapping is actually stunningly literal.
Okay.
In a human being, your compute is your working memory, your analytical capacity, your neuroarchitecture. Your tokens are the sheer volume of sensory inputs, social cues, emotional demands, and environmental stressors you are processing every second.
The data.
The data. When you put a highly sensitive, high-compute brain into an environment where the data inputs drastically exceed its processing capacity, say intense institutional stress or a chaotic social environment, the brain experiences a literal thermodynamic energy crisis.
So it's not just feeling stressed out, it is a measurable metabolic failure.
Precisely. The biophysical data shows that this mismatch fractures the brain's natural rhythms. specifically the smooth theta rhythms, in an area called the supramammillary nucleus.
Wait, the supramammillary nucleus, where is that and what does it actually do? Let's break that down for anyone who isn't a neurobiologist.
Think of it as a tiny rhythmic pacemaker buried deep inside the brain. It acts as a crucial coordinator between the areas that handle memory, spatial navigation, and stress responses.
Okay.
When your one-to-one data-to-compute ratio is violated, this pacemaker essentially stutters. The rhythm breaks. And the physiological result of that broken rhythm is a state known as a dorsovagal freeze.
A dorsovagal freeze. This is the biological deer-in-the-headlights mode, right?
Is the ultimate mammalian survival response. When the system detects a catastrophic metabolic overload, the body as motor brakes physically lock up. Your heart rate drops, your digestion stalls, your cognitive functions go offline, you freeze. So when the host of a 2E mind is sitting there, completely paralyzed by executive dysfunction, unable to start a simple task, it is not a psychological failure of willpower.
No.
It is a structural, hardware-level freeze because the one-to-one chinchilla scaling law of their biology has been violated.
That reframing is incredibly empowering. It validates the experience completely. It removes all the moral judgment and laziness tropes from burnout and just says, look, your data-to-compute ratio is violated, your hardware is fine, but your compiler froze to protect the system from overheating.
Exactly. It is just physics and thermodynamics operating in a biological medium.
Which is comforting, but it leaves us with a very practical problem.
Which is?
Well, if we freeze because our internal systems fall out of sync, how do we reboot? How do we fix the compiler when it stalls out?
To solve the reboot problem, the framework dives into the science of how separate neural networks physically synchronize with each other. And understand that, we first have to look at a concept called ephaptic coupling.
Let's define ephaptic coupling, because this sounds a bit like sci-fi at first glance.
It does. So in standard high school biology, we learn that neurons communicate via chemical synapses. An electrical signal reaches the end of a neuron, it releases a chemical neurotransmitter, that chemical crosses a tiny physical gap, and it triggers the next neuron.
Right, a physical exchange.
Exactly. Ephaptic coupling is an entirely different mechanism. It is when neurons communicate directly with each other via local, extracellular electric fields.
They are literally influencing each other with their electrical auras. No chemicals required.
The electrical field generated by one firing neuron physically pushes on the electrical field of a neighboring neuron, forcing them to sync up their firing rhythms.
That's incredible.
Now, the AppliedXLA framework is exceptionally scientifically rigorous here. It draws a very hard boundary to prevent this from sounding like magic. It explicitly notes that the human skull is an incredible electrical insulator. These electric fields cannot cross physical space outside of your head.
So no telepathy.
No telepathy.
We cannot have literal ephaptic coupling with another person across a crowded room. My brain waves cannot wirelessly hack into your synapses just by sitting next to you.
Strictly internal. However, the framework notes that the interpersonal real-world equivalent of this phenomenon does exist.
Wait, really?
We can sync our brains up across a room. We just use a different medium to cross the physical space. This is proven by Dr. Uri Hassan's neural entrainment research at Princeton.
If you're listening to this and wondering how we can sync brains without electrical fields, this research is going to blow your mind.
Hassan used fMRI machines to watch the brains of a speaker and an active listener in real time. He had one person tell a story and another person deeply listen to it. He proved that when someone speaks and another person truly actively listens, their brain waves physically synchronize. The listener's brain waves begin to oscillate in the exact same patterns as the speaker's with only a slight millisecond delay.
And the medium?
And the coupling medium, the physical bridge crossing the space between them, is the sound waves of the speaker's voice.
The physical sound waves of the voice hit the listener's eardrum and essentially force their neural networks to vibrate at the exact same frequency as the speaker.
What?
Which brings us to one of my absolute favorite applications of this in computer science, rubber duck debugging.
Yes. It is the perfect everyday example of this principle in action.
For anyone outside of software engineering, rubber duck debugging is a very real, very famous practice. You have a catastrophic bug in your code, you've stared at it for hours, and you cannot figure it out.
You're completely stuck.
So you keep a little plastic rubber duck on your desk, you pick it up, and you literally explain your broken code line by line out loud to the inanimate duck. And almost inevitably, halfway through explaining it, you suddenly realize exactly where the error is.
It works every time.
I actually do a version of this, except I don't use a rubber duck. I talk to my golden retriever.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I will explain a massive structural problem in a script to this dog who just wants a tennis ball, and suddenly the solution just clicks into place.
It's a funny image, but cognitive science has formalized exactly why you and your golden retriever are doing cutting-edge neural synchronization.
Wow.
It falls under what King's called the verbal cognitive scaffold model, or VCS. Peer-reviewed studies show that inner speech and the physical act of vocalizing your thoughts create a physical scaffolding for your brain. The act of speaking organizes working memory, controls attention, and structures logic during complex troubleshooting.
And the AppliedXLA framework ties this directly to an acoustic concept coined by Dr. Amar Bose.
The founder of Bose Audio, he coined the term multi-mono.
Right. Multi-mono refers to a system playing disjointed, discrete, independent signals that aren't talking to each other. When you are stuck on a problem, your brain is in a multi-mono state. You have all these fragmented thoughts, parallel tracks of anxiety and logic, just bouncing around in your skull, completely uncompiled.
Exactly. By vocalizing the problem out loud, whether to a rubber duck or a dog, you are using your own physical sound waves and your own auditory feedback loop to force those disjointed multi-mono thoughts into a single, cohesive analog wave.
You are essentially using the sound of your own voice to sync your brain up with itself. Think of it like a tuning fork.
I like that.
If you have a room full of tuning forks, all vibrating at different chaotic frequencies, that's your stressed out multi-mono brain. But you take one master tuning fork and you strike it really hard, that is your voice speaking the problem out loud.
Right.
The physical sound waves travel through the air, hit your own ears, enter your auditory cortex, and physically force all the other neural tuning forks in your brain to vibrate at that exact same single frequency.
That wave interference compiles the noise back into a clean signal. The system reboots.
It's beautiful.
And what that means in practice is that we have a built-in biological mechanism for restoring order. But to take that analogy a step further into human connection, I mean, if sound waves can sync our internal networks, they do the exact same thing interpersonally.
Effective communication, true active listening, literally fuses two separate minds into a single resonant cognitive wave. You are acting as the master tuning fork for someone else's chaotic brain, and they are doing it for you.
Yes.
It provides a literal biological definition of what it means to be on the same wavelength. It is not a poetic metaphor, it is an fMRI-validated reality.
And it sets up the ultimate question of the framework. We know the brain can use sound waves to sync neural networks. We know it uses mobile stencils to filter data. But just how flexible is this biological hardware, really? If a part of the system is truly broken, can it adapt?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because to explore that flexibility, the framework takes us into the science of sensory substitution. Specifically, a device called the BrainPort Tongue Display Unit.
The BrainPort was pioneered by Paul Backrita, and the underlying concepts have been pushed further into the mainstream by researchers like David Eagleman with his haptic feedback vests.
Oh yeah, Eagleman's work is fascinating.
It is. The BrainPort is a device designed for individuals who are completely blind. It essentially looks like a pair of sunglasses connected by a wire to a small grid that sits flat on the user's tongue.
A camera on the glasses takes in the visual pixels of the room, and it translates those visual pixels into tiny electrical impulses on that tongue grid. The camera sees a shape, and it essentially draws that shape on the tongue using microshocks.
And the visceral description from the users is fascinating. They literally describe the sensation as feeling like champagne bubbles or popping candy or, most famously, dancing gummy bears on their tongue.
Dancing gummy bears. If you are listening to this, try to imagine feeling popping candy on your tongue and somehow using that to navigate a room.
It's wild to even think about.
Because the wild part is, the brain doesn't just register this as a weird, random tingling sensation.
Not at all. Both primate fMRI research and human clinical trials show an extreme, almost unbelievable level of neuroplasticity.
Oh, okay.
When the optic nerve is broken, the visual cortex, the massive part of the brain normally completely dedicated to processing information from the eyes, is essentially sitting there unemployed. So it gets completely recruited to process these tactile signals from the tongue.
Wait, let's tie this back to the MIT research from segment 1. Are you saying those alpha waves, stencils, the ones filtering gamma waves, they literally just shift their focus?
Yes.
They stop trying to gate the broken optic nerve and they move over to start gating the tactile data coming from the tongue.
That is exactly what happens. The biological compiler just reroutes. The brain takes the data from those dancing gummy bears, and it renders a legitimate three-dimensional spatial map in the user's mind.
That is staggering.
A blind user can see doorways, they can catch a rolling ball, they can navigate a complex obstacle course, all through the electrical impulses on their tongue.
The brain is quite literally seeing with the tongue. And this right here is where the AppliedXLA framework unpacks its namesake. We talked about XLA, the compiler. Now let's talk about the algebra part.
Right.
The framework looks at the ancient 9th century Arabic root of the word algebra, which is al-jab.
Coined by the mathematician Al-Khwarizmi. It is a stunning historical and biological convergence because al-jab literally translates to the reunion of broken parts.
The reunion of broken parts. Think about the mathematical equation playing out in the blind user's head. The brain has a missing value. Vision equals X. The eyes are broken. The signal isn't arriving. But the brain is fundamentally an algebraic engine. By substituting a different sensory variable, tactile tongue impulses, which we can call D-Day, the brain's neural networks act as coefficients. They multiply, route, and compile that new data to solve the equation.
The primary takeaway here is that the brain does not care where the data comes from. It doesn't care that the original hardware, the eyes, are broken.
Right.
It just says, give me a variable, any valid variable, and I will do the math. It is structurally designed, down to its cellular foundation, to reunite broken sensory parts into a whole consciousness.
But this raises the most important question of this entire deep dive. This is where the applied philosophy really hits home for the listener.
Exactly.
We just established that the brain can literally substitute tongue tingles for eyesight to render a physical map of a room. So isn't the AppliedXLA framework suggesting that the brain can do this emotionally too? Can the brain substitute new, safe connection parameters to bypass broken traumatic relational circuits?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human trauma and recovery, the answer is absolutely yes.
Wow.
The framework argues that profound trauma, institutional failure, or severe chronic stress creates a missing variable in our relational and emotional mapping. The original pathway is broken. But the biological hardware underneath it, the analog filtering waves, the chinchilla scaling parameters that crave balance, the neural coupling mechanisms that sync us to others, they are all still entirely intact.
The compiler isn't broken, it's just missing a variable.
The system is just waiting for a valid substitution. It is waiting for an unshielded, safe input, whether that is a deeply resonant conversation, a new environment, or a stabilizing relationship, to run the algebraic calculation and restore the system's wholeness.
Wow. You know, we so often walk around thinking of ourselves as permanently stuck in our programming. We think we are fundamentally limited by our broken parts.
You do.
Maybe you're listening to this and your missing variable is a lack of executive focus, or it's profound relational trauma, or it's a literal sensory deficit. But the peer-reviewed science we just walked through today completely shatters that narrative.
Complete.
From MIT's analog mobile stencils organizing the chaos, to DeepMind's strict chinchilla scaling laws explaining why we freeze, to Uri Hasser's neural sound wave coupling proving we can sync minds, all the way to the gummy bears of the brain port, I mean, it all proves that our hardware is unbelievably adaptable.
It highlights why this kind of critical thinking and cross-disciplinary synthesis is so vital. This framework is a masterclass in how to draw knowledge from wildly different fields.
Yeah.
It takes cold artificial intelligence logic, historical 9th century mathematics, and primate fMRI scans, and it weaves them together to create a deeply functional, highly accurate understanding of the human condition.
It's incredible.
It proves that we are not isolated, static machines doomed by our damage. We are dynamic systems, constantly seeking thermodynamic balance and interpersonal resonance.
We are built to heal. Our brains are constantly running al-jab, the reunion of broken parts. Which leaves us with one final provocative question to ponder today. If our brains are biologically wired to run this biological algebra, if we are constantly subconsciously solving for missing variables to make ourselves whole, what missing value are you currently trying to solve for in your own life? And more importantly, what unexpected variable could you substitute right now to finally complete the equation?